evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode number 986, the pre show. It's a marvelous part of the program. We do three things during the pre show. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time we say outrageous things. All right, Monday night weather party. We got four people lined up waiting to get in. Wow. The line is long. Let's bring them in. Let's start this thing. So, if you're looking for the actual beginning of the show, move the slider over about 8 minutes. But you might miss something really good here because this part of the show does not make the produced audio podcast, which is how most people consume this program. And occasionally there's a little nugget in here that is magical. Bill, what was going on this date 7 years ago, 2017, Alabama?
It snowed.
Yes, big snow.
Big
One of
snow.
our best, one of our best pre-Christmas snowstorms on record. The ground was all covered in snow.
I almost wrote about it yesterday because it really was a fun snow.
And yeah, most
Yeah.
of it came down on the 8th. And as I recall, that was a Friday. And it ended early morning on the 9th. And we had some 1 foot snows over in East Alabama, 1 foot in spots. That's a
Right.
whopper right there. I, I, I looked today and I probably have 5,000 pictures from that day. It's like,
I was trying to remember
it's a
how well
big,
we forecast it.
I
Um,
think it was done pretty well. I mean, now I don't think we forecast 1 foot of snow, but I think the general event was forecast okay. But that was a couple of spots over there in the terrain, East Alabama
yeah.
terrain, but
Yeah, we went
that was a good
sledding
one.
that day over here at Briarwood, and then they put a bunch of pine trees on that hill because they decided they didn't never wanted to see that happen again.
Liability is the key word here. Yes.
It's a very nice hill
Um,
over there, and it's perfect for sledding, but they put a stop to that. Some very
all
fast
right.
growing pine trees.
Try multi-speaker view. Highlight multiple active speakers at the same time for a more engaging meeting.
Oh, well, if
Okay.
everybody talks at the same time, that'll be very handy.
Um, I never really know. I think what I see feeds YouTube. What I choose is my view here. I think anybody can choose any view they want to, but I think what feeds the YouTube channel, it's what I see. So
Mm.
I typically just leave it in the deal where the person speaking gets the big screen, which is the way it should be. I'm very concerned that James Adelot has been connecting to audio for the last 10 minutes. And um, we've lost Rick Smith. Rick is doing a tornado talk in Ardmore, Oklahoma.
He's in one of my
Ardmore,
towns.
Oklahoma.
Got
Ardmore.
hotels there. I
Well,
should, I
fix the
should,
man
I,
up.
s-
Fix him up.
I
Fix him
offered.
up.
You saw my email. I should have offered to. One of my best clients is there, and he is petrified of tornadoes. And he calls me every time
I,
there's a risk, anywhere near Ardmore, and I walk him through it because Ardmore gets its share. I tell you what, they come there a lot.
what's weird, I honestly think when I was in Dallas back in the mid 80s, they were in the Dallas TV market, not in the Oklahoma City TV market. We had four counties in southern Oklahoma, which I thought was a little odd, but it is what it is. I don't know if they still are.
They have some weather there. In 2009 they had a big tornado hit Lone Grove just west of Ardmore. And they've got a Uneral plant there, James, in 1995. It was heavily damaged by a tornado. It's right across the interstate from where our hotels are. And his dad was telling me about standing out there watching the tornado. go through.
I think Ardmore now is in the Sherman Denison Ada market, but it's on the border. Like if you go one county north, it's Oklahoma City. If you go one county west, it's Lawton, Wichita Falls, and if you go very far south, you're back into Dallas Fort Worth. So it's kind of in that no man's land of a lot of
It really
markets
is,
that all come
David.
together.
That's kind of weird. That's strange.
Yeah.
Well, my client is in the Bill Murray television market. He is calling me even when he's in Tulsa or anywhere. He's like in a hotel. He's like, yep, here we go. Gotta. I'm getting all the guests down, even if it wasn't his hotel. I'm getting all the guests down to the safe place. I'm like, okay, good. You're doing good.
Well, you're welcome to just chime in here. Bill, during the Lone Grove tornado, I worked at the Weather Service in Norman, and I was giving a spotter talk one county east of Lone Grove as it was going on, which was pretty surreal.
Wow.
Yeah. During that tornado?
Yes.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. That one scared me. I thought that was gonna get Ardmore. I really did. I was petrified that night.
I believe that was February 10th. So that's kind of when we would start doing spotter talks and getting geared up for spring.
Wow. Yeah, it was on February 11th in 2009. It did cross I-35 north of Ardmore too. There in Murray County, killed 9 people. Strongest February tornado on record in Oklahoma. Is that still a thing? Golly.
I think that's still true.
Wow. James Spann checks from Lone Grove were found in Broken Arrow, 150 miles away.
Woo.
From my weather history.
Goodness.
My weather history annals here.
Wow. So if James A. cannot get his audio to work, we'll just kind of roll with the flow. We got Rick
there
out.
he is.
We have
as if on cue, he says,
woohoo. Okay. We have Neil Jacobs out. He's got some AGU thing, but he had a question he sent in.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have Kim McLean with a child that was barfing at school today, so she might not be able to make it. And Jen's out; she's ill.
It's the season.
So but it is. 'Tis the season. But the chosen few are here. And we'll get the thing started here in 30 seconds. We have to wait till the top of the hour when we hit the local television, and then we will get started. Ooh, we got James working the TV shift tonight. Here comes Kim. She's going to make it. Good.
Actually shaved after a week off.
Why?
Right?
I mean, come on. I mean,
it'd take me a year to grow a beard that looks as good as David's. Probably 2, and some hormone treatments.
That's about to say testosterone treatments. Yeah. That's outstanding. That's too good. All right, welcome to those watching on the television side. It's the Monday Night Weather Party, WeatherBrains, and let's get this thing going here. We have no severe storms in the TV markets that we are on here, so no, just some light rain, and we can handle that. All righty, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
Yes. Most marvelous time of the year, Christmas time, getting close. WeatherBrains episode number 986. This is the weekly show that is all about weather for weather geeks, dweebs, nerds, dorks, and weenies, and we're glad you are here. 986. And again, we're going to hit show 1000 in March of 2025, and we are anxiously awaiting the ultimate destination of our show 1000 location. We'll figure that out sooner than later. But I see Troy Kimmel just popped on here from the magical office with all of the books. All of the books. How many books are in that room?
No.
I think I came online as we were talking about, you called everybody a dweeb or a nerd, so I was kind of joining that.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is perfect timing. There you go. There you go. No, it's a great day in Austin. Just kind of wrapping things up, the University of Texas for the semester and for my career. And so that's going really well. And the weather was really pretty nice today, up in the lower 80s today.
Now let's review what you just said here. I mean, with this profound statement, you just said you're wrapping up your career. What do you mean by that?
Dropping the lead
After 36 years of teaching, I'm retiring on the 31st of December, and we'll then do other stuff after that.
I mean, you're just a kid. I've got underwear older than you. You don't need to be retiring. What's up with that?
You may want to check that underwear. Okay.
Yeah. I clearly do need some new underwear. But
you do need some new underwear.
I really do. And in fact, that's my dream Christmas gift. It's socks and underwear. When you're a kid, you hate it. When you're old, it's the greatest thing ever.
No, it's been fun, and I've enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun, even being an Aggie at the University of Texas. Been lots of fun, but it's time to move on. I've done what I can do, and I've got a lot of, I've got other emergency management stuff and that. And besides that, if it all goes wrong, I'm going to live with Bill Murray.
Yeah, come on. We're going to stay at the home with Swedes.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. With a waffle machine. Yes, Troy misses that waffle machine. Kim, I apologize. I'm so sorry. You're the only lady on the show tonight, and I've already taken it down the tubes. I am so sorry. How are you?
Please, you don't ever keep sweet on my account. We can tell from the previous 900 however many shows. Would expect no different. No, I am great. And Troy, just what a profound thing when someone who's made such an impact decides to retire. And I know that you've affected so many young people, and I guess I'll call myself old, but you've affected all of us too. And thank you for just how you have such a supporting demeanor. I always know if there's bad weather that hits my part of Norman, I'm going to hear from Troy. He's always watching for all of us, and that's just the role you play. You're such a caring person. So whatever you do next in more of the emergency management stuff you do, maybe we can get into that some.
Yeah.
We have another emergency manager here on the show tonight, so that could be nice to talk shop. Whatever it is that you do, I know you'll do it with a lot of love, care, diligence, just like you've taught. So
what's really interesting, Kim, and I think James has said this before, and I'd leave it with all of you as well. For as much as I hope that I've been able to help students through the years and everything, how how much I've learned from them. And that is what's amazing. And I see people nodding because you know what I'm talking about. You learn things. You sit there days. I'm sitting there going, I'm the stupidest thing on the face of the earth. I just learned this. But I've told them, I've said, I've learned so much from you. So that I appreciate.
Yep, that's the wonderful thing about teaching. It can be a two-way street.
Yep,
and
it is.
By the way, I do want to really briefly say, I want to say hello to all of our faithful listeners, including people who come up to us at conferences when we're there and say hello, that they are listeners. That is a lovely thing. David and I ran a panel at IAEM and had some folks who were listeners come up and chat with me, and I loved seeing you all. And I even, just this week in one of my work interviews with one of the major airlines doing an aviation project, they mentioned that they are loyal listeners. And I got to give the interview from this room, so in this chair, and he just looks at me and he goes, I feel like I know you. I know this is an imbalanced relationship. I know all about you, and you're just meeting me. But we really are that way in this show. They really do get to know us.
No, they know probably too much about us.
I was to say, for
here's
good and bad. For good.
So I was in a McDonald's drive-through in Lincoln, Alabama, this nice lady at the drive-thru said, "Man, I listen to that show y'all do every Monday night. I'm a weather dweeb." I said,
There
"All
you
right,
go.
yes." I mean, there's a lot, even the non-professional, just the weather hobbyists. They're all out there. So I like everybody else. I'm just honored that you listen. Bill Murray, who'd have thunk this? We started this thing in 2006.
It
And
seems like yesterday, James. I was riding around in a car in Baltimore at a company meeting when we were having the planning meeting for it. And if you'd have told me we'd be doing it, 19 years later, I would have said, "Yeah, that's probably right. James is that kind of guy."
Well, one thing
January.
too about this whole thing is that I love y'all to death, my fellow panelists, but the people like David and Patrick that come on here every Monday night with us.
That's the
This is
reason.
not our show. This is this. We learn so much. David, good to see you. Patrick, good to see you. And
That's why we do
they
it.
make the big difference. They come in here and share with us, and we have a good time.
No, I'm telling
I
you,
love
you
that.
ought
Do
to
you
earn
remember the first really
CEU
big
credits.
guest we had, James, back? Jack Williams, USA Today weather book.
Yep.
Fella,
Wow.
way
That was
back
a
when.
legendary. But no, I think we ought to get CEUs. We ought to get credits for listening to not us, but these guests that we bring on here. I listen. I learn more from this show than I do at a lot of conferences. And again, the conferences are important; they're great, but it's really good. But having said that, we got to get started. James Adelot is going to be guiding our discussion this evening from Fox 23 in Tulsa. James, take it.
Yeah, and want to thank David and Patrick for joining us this evening. And we're going to talk about worn-on forecast systems, severe weather, and let me tell you guys, this has been a really cool tool for me to use and for a lot of people in this part of the country to use too. But we usually get things started with the personal probing questions of what got you into weather. And David, you're a friend of the show. You know this routine. We'll let you go first. And while Patrick collects his thoughts and tries to move to the other side of the state away from me, I think.
No, I appreciate it. I feel like I think it's my third or fourth time, which is awesome. And I always feel like I'm way out of my depth and just way over my head in this. So very much appreciate the opportunity to be on as always and to chat with you all as someone who is a complete, poser, fake, whatever you want to call it.
No,
not going to buy that, David.
No. Nope.
Yeah, get out of here.
So, just as a refresher, I'm David Hogg. I am a research associate at OU CERO/NOAA NSSL. Kim, there on the bottom of the screen for me, brought me in to be part of her team originally, which was now starting my fourth year, which is crazy. But over 3 years ago. So my background is in emergency management. I was an emergency manager for almost 10 years operationally in Kansas and Oklahoma before coming over into this kind of world. And so have been on kind of all kinds of levels, was at Kansas State University, was at the Department of Agriculture, have been in city government, county government. And my background, I grew up on a farm in southwest Oklahoma. So I grew up farming and ranching, and always like to tell people I grew up on the dry line because I feel like everything about our world was driven by the dry line, and all those horrible storms that Oklahoma City gets usually formed right on top of us. So still have a great love of agriculture and rural areas and try to do my best for rural emergency managers. So I think that's a good recap.
There you go. Awesome, David. All right, Patrick, you've had a moment to compose yourself and spill all the beans here, huh?
All right. Yeah, I guess it's time to break the ice. Yeah. So I'm first time on the show. Appreciate you having me. Thanks for the invite. And yeah, if this is going to be about storytelling, I've got a lot to tell. So I'll enjoy this. But you asked about my original motivation getting into meteorology. Well, I am an Oklahoma guy, just like David. I grew up around the Oklahoma City area in a town called Mustang. But I do have this odd kind of period where I lived in Southern California in my middle school years and going into early high school. So when we moved back here, I was a freshman in high school, and we moved back in the spring. And there was a day, April 9th of 92, to date myself, where the TV started broadcasting all these land spouts. It was like 16 land spouts coming out of the same thunderstorm updraft up around Woodward, Oklahoma. And so that kind of was the event that sparked my interest. And for the rest of that spring, I was taking notes. I was watching television. A lot of what I learned early on was from you broadcast meteorologists and from watching the Weather Channel and so forth. So and I wanted to be a part of that kind of, when you have a severe weather event, whether it's Oklahoma or Alabama or wherever, it's a big deal, and we're all helping each other get through it. And so I wanted to be involved in those days in some way. And so I actually found my way into the National Weather Service after my time here at OU. And after an 18-year career as a forecaster, I've moved back here to be part of the War on Forecast teams since 2020. So that's kind of bringing up to speed on where I'm at.
So Mustang, Southern California, kind of no culture shock there, huh?
No, they say that's where I lost my accent, was by moving to California for a few years, because my dad had a real thick accent. But and ironically, we're actually going to do a WAFS run for Southern California tomorrow. There's a big Santa Ana event forecast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you haven't had fun until you've landed in Santa Ana winds in LAX or Ontario. It's an interesting experience, an interesting arrival. Let's start with the Warn On forecast system. What is it? Who wants to take that one?
Well, David, you could, or yeah, he's shaking his head.
Well, first, wait. Let me interrupt you a little bit.
I am totally here as the end user storyteller. Patrick gets to answer all of the technical questions. I'm just the guy that gets to play with it and talk to other people that play with it.
Okay, let me interrupt by saying you all did a kind of a case study walkthrough at one of the conferences, as Kim was mentioning, and that's one of the incredibly useful things about the conferences. You get plugged into a lot of this stuff that people wouldn't normally get exposed to, especially in broadcasting. Talk to us a little bit, now that background's out of the way. What exactly is WAFS? How is it useful? Who came up with it? Did Patrick, did you do the coding for all of this?
No. So, yeah. So the Warn On forecast system is an ensemble analysis and modeling system. And you're into weather, you use weather models, you use ensembles. There's lots of these around, but this is the first one that's really been designed for watch and warning operations. It has a heavy emphasis on its design to be used in a 0 to 6 hour time frame when individual storms are evolving rapidly, right? So this is not your day 2 outlook, day 1 outlook kind of a system. This is, okay, the watch needs to come out, storms are starting to fire. And the special thing about WAFS is that it will do rapid data assimilation. Most model systems are taking in new data. At most, it would be once per hour, or some models it's not even that frequent. But with WAFS, you get a new analysis every 15 minutes, and it relaunches a forecast every 30 minutes that will give you a 3 to 6 hour forecast. So it's kind of, I think of it as doing what the forecaster does on the warning desk, which is constantly re-envisioning, okay, what's on radar and satellite right now? How is this evolving? How are things changing from what I expected? And then I'm going to rethink. Now I have new expectations. WAFS is doing that as a model system to aid you in that task. So every 30 minutes, you're going to get a new forecast that changes a little, or maybe it changes a lot, but hopefully it trends in the right direction and it locks on to the tracks of individual storms to give forecasters a visual on the things that they in the past would have had to imagine.
When did all this happen? When did this start?
Yeah, that's a great question, because this is really a long-term project. They tell me that really the first inklings of it were in the 1990s. Yeah, but by the time modeling had matured enough and kind of operational meteorology was starting to use some rapidly updating storm scale models like the HER, in 2009, things were the stage was set to actually get some funding to create a project here at the National Severe Storms Laboratory. And that's the year that the kind of foundational work and foundational publications started to come out. So 2009, we're off and running. It took about, say, 6 years to develop a system that could do those things I was just talking about. And then by 2016 to 17, we started to see experimental use in the hazardous weather test bed here, starting to get in touch with forecasters in the National Weather Service on how to actually apply this tool. Does it work? That kind of thing. And it's just been growing ever since then, with lots and lots of experimental warn on forecast runs in the spring and summer. And we're doing a better job in recent years of getting some events throughout the year. So long-term project.
Kim had a great question too, or some comments, some perspective on this.
Yeah, we're all chatting in our famous chat right now about different things. I know Troy got to experience some of this. He came in as a participant to the test bed right when I was starting at the lab as a research scientist back in around 2017.
Right.
But back when I was a grad student is when this program was getting formalized, and I had just decided to stay for my PhD and to transition from economic valuation stuff more into decision science more broadly, incorporating more psychology. And I was looking for a project. I was looking for an idea. And I saw what was going on at NSSL and was just fascinated by this early start idea at Warn on Forecast. And there were a lot of questions at the time. How would a social scientist even approach this and study what this could be, what this could do? There was for those who are familiar with the Was-Is movement, the Weather and Society Integrated Studies program that started at NCAR and really helped to seed social science in the field. They hosted a Was-Is workshop at Norman in 2008, and this was one of the big topics. And there were a lot of questions flying around, some of which we still don't have really perfect answers to. But there were questions about, okay, can this help to reduce the perception of false alarms? What Patrick was talking about. This is the opportunity to give more of what's in a forecaster's head between a watch and a warning, give more of that context. Can the technology really do it? What do we need to do with the technology to make that message come across? So those were some of the early questions that set the stage for what this has become. And I love that I got to see the early days where we were really just grappling. For the most part, we really fixated on things like visual design and experimenting with different renderings of these kinds of products. And once there were actual prototypes, what Patrick was talking about, that came around 6-7 years ago, when we finally had that, then it was obvious that the early ideas were just so small compared to the magnitude of what was possible. And then working with users, and Troy came in and started to take part in experiments, and David, when we hired him to really reach into the real world, this is where everything has taken off. So I'm overjoyed to have the chance to bring some of that historical perspective. But Troy, when we're going to get into some of the current activities, you saw some of the prototype, like the early first fee, so probabilistic hazard information, where it's an idea, it's a concept that grew. WAFS is fuller, and maybe Patrick, we can get into this in a second to talk about what all it encompasses. But early on, there was at least a thought ahead of a specific storm, we could give the probability that it will go on to produce a severe weather hazard like wind, hail, tornado. So Troy got to see one of the first ones of those. And Troy, talk about your impressions of seeing this kind of technology in person.
Well, I found it really amazing what we saw when we were in the test bed. Now, I'm surprised. Well, I'm not surprised that we've never been invited back, because I was invited in to come in as David as a EM, just to kind of come in. We had our broadcasters with us, of course, but coming in as EM, and I worked with Kevin Clazel. It's I had the most fun for that week. We had the chance to do that, and working with our weather service colleagues to have them, forecasters from around the country, that came in as well. And I walked out of there just smiling. And I'm sort of like James from Tulsa said, to be able to see that and see how it's grown. It's just amazing nowadays. And I'm the kind of person that sits there, and Kim knows this, as I'm sitting there going, okay, we ready to put this out yet? We ready to make this operational yet? And I guess that's my big question, is when we foresee maybe that we could make this more operational, Patrick and David, in the field. But I'll tell you, I walked away amazed. It was the best week. I had more fun. Of course, anytime you spend with Kim, Clazel, just kidding. But
Wow.
But
Wow.
anyway,
He was
I
just
love
a guest,
Kevin.
Troy. He's not, it's
Still
not even
sore about that
cold
football
yet.
game.
Yeah, well,
Just a football game, Troy. It's just a
yeah,
football game.
I know. But really, it was a fun week, and really was cool.
Bill, you had a question?
Yeah, I've got one. James. I figured there's some successes you guys have seen come through the program. Some case studies. What are the best ones? Each of you share a couple that you think, we're really promising about the technology. Who wants to go first?
Oh my gosh, I have so many of these. I might have to go first.
Good.
And then you'll
Well,
come back.
I
We'll
can
be-
make
we'll
some
be here till
popcorn
midnight.
and we can go
We'll
all
be here till
night about
midnight.
it, so.
No, we
Yeah.
won't.
By the way, none of the buttons on my thing are working. I wasn't able to open the chat or anything. So if you're talking to me in the chat, I might not see it. But
Well, good. As long as the mute
lucky.
doesn't come on accidentally,
We call that
you're
lucky.
Good, so.
Yeah, call that lucky. Yep.
but as long as you can hear me, I'll keep rolling. So, there was a case that really stands out is the May of 2022 derecho across the northern plains.
Yeah.
So this was kind of midway in our experimental development where most offices had now heard of WAFs and maybe seen it a time or two, but they didn't have a lot of knowledge or trust in it because they just didn't have the repetition with the system. But one of the special things we did was set up an internal chat room where we can have researchers and developers of the WAF system communicating with the forecasters in real time. So they can ask us questions about the output that they're seeing. We can maybe feed them some products that we're seeing that might be useful to them. And on that day, it wasn't real clear that there would be a derecho. There was risk of all the different severe weather hazards, and we knew there'd be a lot of storms. But the Warren forecast system will, like I said, kind of trend towards and lock onto a solution as it gets more of that radar data fed into it. So as the storms began to develop after an hour or two in Nebraska, the system was suddenly just ratcheting up, like, oh my gosh, this is going to be, if WAFs is right, a massive derecho producing over 100-mile-an-hour winds. So some of the Weather Service forecasters in Nebraska, South Dakota were asking us in the chat, like, hey, this is wild. How much trust should we put into this? And we were able to say to them with some confidence that, we saw this in the Wisconsin event in 2019, and we've seen it here and there. And when WAFs does this, it's usually right. So just that bit of added confidence, and from someone who's looked at a lot of WAFs cases, I think pushed those forecasters over the edge into, okay, we're going to take this seriously. We're going to, instead of having a normal severe thunderstorm warning, we'll do the wireless emergency alert with it. Storm Prediction Center quoted the WAFs runs in their mesoscale discussions that day. And this was still, 2-hour lead time to the worst impacts there in Sioux Falls. So that's my long-winded case number one. Case number two, well, maybe I could probably refer to some of the heavy rain cases, because that's maybe a little bit of surprising aspect for a system that was originally motivated by the tornado problem and severe weather. We explored using it for heavy rainfall cases starting in 2018, 2019. At that time, I actually worked at the Weather Prediction Center as a forecaster. So this was very relevant to my work back then. And we found that, I think because rainfall and things, when you have storms kind of combining and training over an area, they tend to get a little bit larger, and that's a bit more predictable than some of the individual isolated tornado storms. And we find that WAFs does a really, really good job with a lot of heavy rain cases. So I could point to a number of those. But I think what's special about all of them, and what comes to mind first is one that happened when I was on the desk there at WPC, was on August 6th of 2020. WAFs predicted the development of an individual cell that would then remain stationary over the city of Leesburg, Virginia, for 4 hours. And I, being operational as long as I had and watching storm scale models, I'd never seen a model be able to hold a storm in place for 4 hours. There's always instabilities in the model, or there's cold pools pushing it one way or another, or changes in the wind environment. It's going to grow upscale, and it was doing this not just in a member or two. This was like the average solution out of WAFs. It was really locked onto this, I think, in part because there's some terrain there that kind of helped it out. But that's almost exactly what happened to the minute. There were storms that formed. They lasted about 4 hours over the city, 6 to 7 inches of rain. Now, there were a couple of false alarm signals also in the domain, but the fact that you catch the worst thing that happened that day, the flash flood emergency, was really impressive to me. And I could go on and on. So,
what was the date of that Leesburg event, Patrick?
That was my birthday, August 6th, 2020. Yeah, in the evening.
Talk about let's not forget to talk about Greenfield, Iowa, because it was a big success story too, wasn't it? And I want Kim to jump in on the back of that and talk about what that kind of additional alerting could mean to a lot of vulnerable and sensitive segments of our population. So Patrick, do you want to take that one, or David?
I know quite a bit about the Greenfield case. I don't know, David. Good. Okay.
Y'all tag team it, both of you. We'd love to hear from both of you.
Yeah. Chime in if I'm missing something. But yeah, the Greenfield, Iowa, that's kind of a good case that's indicative of what WAFs can do for tornado lead time in some of the more predictable cases, right? So it's not going to be that way for every event. Rolling Fork, Mississippi is one that was really, really challenging. But for some of these like Greenfield, we start looking about 2 hours ahead of time. And there's various ways that you can look at rotation in storms in the model output, right? So we're not capturing at 3-kilometer resolution. We're not modeling the actual tornado, but doing a decent job at indicating areas where rotation is more likely or will be stronger than in other storms. And that was the case for the Greenfield storm. If you were to look at the significant tornado parameter out of WAFs, or the low level rotation intensity of updraft helicity or vertical vorticity, all of these things were pointing to that couple of county area in and around Greenfield, again, at 2-hour lead time. And that's something we were talking about in the chat room. And I know there were some forecasters in the Des Moines office who were in the various chat rooms seeing that conversation. Now, we can't point to it directly and say that WAFs was what drove a particular warning at a particular time, but it adds to that preponderance of evidence that pushes a forecaster over the edge to issuing a warning, maybe a little sooner, maybe a little more confidently than they would have otherwise. And so that's the story that kind of emerged out of that. And I've seen that in so many other cases. This is one of the things I'm most passionate about with Warn on Forecast, is that for the more predictable, kind of longer track storms, on the days that really, really matter because they're more likely to produce fatalities and damage, I think WAFs can really get us into that like 60 to 90 minute window of messaging something. It may not be a warning, but we kind of need to rethink that now that we have this capability, once it becomes operational, how are we as a weather community and as National Weather Service going to make use of that?
David?
Did David jump in too? Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about...
Now I'll jump in here because I think Patrick set me up really well with that, because I think from the EM perspective, I am very privileged in the sense that I get to work directly with a lot of EMs to learn really, how they're making decisions, what they're looking for, what their needs are. And, it was mentioned, this space between, if you want to call the watch to warning space or whatever that is, like in a lot of ways, and I've made this joke before. I said, it's an EM. It's almost like as the time toward the storm gets closer, my job kind of goes down almost, where I'm just waiting to see what happens. And so often that waiting to see what happens, there's sort of a void of information. You've got a convective outlook, you may have a watch, and then you're just sitting there looking at radar. And so it's this being able to fill in and give some of that context, not only of, what potentially is going to happen, but just like Patrick said, even, what's the magnitude potentially going to look like? What can I start, are there decisions I can start making? Are there calls I can start making? Are there people that I need to be contacting to let them know, hey, this is what potentially could happen. This is the magnitude of the threat that we might be looking at. Or on the flip side, and this is honestly one of my favorite things about WAFs, and I've got a great example from last summer 2023. The flip side of being able as an EM to look at an event and say, we're good. This is not going to be a threat for us. And how impactful that could be. So summer 2023, June, it was the Perryton, Texas tornado day. If you remember that day, it wasn't that storm, but it was that day. Early in the afternoon, there was a huge supercell that formed in southwest Oklahoma. And I get to, as part of not really my job, but when I'm not working, I embed with a local EM office as a volunteer, quote unquote. And so I'm always talking with them and always getting to share with them. And it's almost like my own little mini test bed at times where I can look at things and talk with them and get to see what is meaningful for them. Well, anyway, the storm forms in southwest Oklahoma. And if you know Oklahoma, Highway 9, like every storm's come up Highway 9 into, the southwest Oklahoma City metro area. Well, the county I work with is in McLean County on the southwest side, so just across the river from Norman. Like, this is a storm forming in a place where we expect to have significant weather. 2 to 3 hours downstream, we're going to have a major thunderstorm. And very, very rapidly, WAFS shows a very, very strong, 90-degree right turn of this storm that's going to take it, not up Highway 9, but a hard right, diving down into Texas. And so within a run or two, I'm able to tell the people that I'm working with in the county, hey, you don't have to worry about this. This looks really bad on radar. This is going to be a really bad storm, but it's not going to impact us. We're okay. We're going to get more storms later, and we did, but this is not going to be a problem for us. And so Lawton, that's southwest of us, had 95-mile-an-hour wind, baseball-sized hail, etc. McLean County had nothing. And so to me, this is one of those things that we focus so often on, where is the storm going, to communicate that. But from an EM side of things, if I can save 4 or 5 hours of not being in an EOC, not having a shelter open, not having my people stood up and ready for a major impact, that's a huge win as well. And so that's, I think another great example of WAF's got it exactly right. And I've talked with the EM in Lawton multiple times since then. He's one of the ones that always asks me every time now, before a severe weather event, hey, is WAFS running? Are we going to have WAFS data? So that they know. But not only did it help them in their understanding, but it helped the people know, hey, the storm is not going to be a problem for you. And so I think from the EM side, it's like thinking through all those different pieces that are a little bit different that we don't often think about, I think.
So the EM in Lawton is why you always send me those emails to see if we're running. I get it.
It's good to have an advocate up high. That's what the Lawton EM has learned. It's awesome. I know, Bill, you had said that you were interested in hearing a little bit of public perspective. I think I'll just follow on from the great lead that David just provided. One of the things that I've looked at with some other folks, Kevin Simmons, the weather economist, from an economic perspective, is how could something like this affect the decision making of our publics? And there's a lot of different ways you can look at that. One way that we thought about looking at it was to look at business decision making. We thought about that because this is a population you can expect to have some sense for their relative, opportunity costs for sheltering or responding, versus what they stand to lose if they don't respond, and then they're caught off guard, or they're hit without sheltering, whatever. This is where probabilistic information, in the past, we've had experiments with the public that looked at decision making with probabilistic information sort of in that watch to warning time period, and they all assume people can do that calculus, that they have those trade-offs in mind. So when we looked at a population that we really reasonably could expect would have those trade-offs in mind, we found that there was a huge economic benefit to small businesses across our country if we were able to give this kind of gap-filling information. But that was almost entirely realized by cases where people would see that, okay, you might have a warning out, but the probability is actually pretty low that there will be a tornado with this thing. And they would either stall or just not take protective action. And that saved the opportunity cost of shutting down the business, stopping sales, stopping production, whatever it was. And this taught me that we have such a unique view on the risk proposition in the field of meteorology. We're so focused on safety, and we often forget about the other part of NOAA's mission. It's about economic prosperity, and in a lot of situations, a lot of risk situations, we're actually pitting those two things against one another. It's sort of a safe, how much do you want to forego to be safe? And this is where the probabilistic information is theorized to have all of its value. Instead of the Weather Service being in this unenviable position of a warning forecaster sitting there at the desk having to figure out when, for all of society, a storm goes from not mattering to suddenly mattering, so no warning to having a warning, we put out a spectrum of information where people are able to, based on their own risk tolerances and the amount of time that they need to make decisions, whatever those decisions are, that they can do that. And that this has been one of the great, sort of challenges of our system to date, is we put all of that on these bench forecasters to weigh against, all right, if you want a lot of lead time, you've got to be willing to live with a lot of false alarms, and you've got to be willing to live with a big false alarm area. And these are just the trade-offs given the limits of technology. But now we can give a little bit more of the thinking and let everybody else in. And so that's where we're starting to see this whole world open up. Now, I will say it started to also push us to ask some fundamental questions about what we are doing here with as a communication system. One of the most fundamental questions I think that a system like Warn on Forecast raises is, what is a warning? So when you have this spectrum of probability information, you're giving people how certain you are that XYZ could happen over time. Well, there's been a lot of conversation for the last 10 years about, do we want to have an hour-long lead time on warnings? Like, is that the goal, to increase the amount of time that we're actually warning people? There's some evidence from real-world situations that suggests that when you increase lead time a whole lot, people don't have the environmental cues anymore. They think it's a false alarm, or it's for some other part of a county or whatever, and they stop paying attention. And so there's a concern that just hitting the warning button isn't enough, and it might actually be misleading at a certain point. Early on, so when the system was brand new, I was working with my first student was Stephanie Hoekstra, who's now working at GSL, the Weather Lab, the NOAA Weather Lab in Boulder. We were just talking this past week about her research. It was one of the first social science WAFs publications, but it looked at what would people prefer their warning lead time to be if they could pick anything. How much time do they actually need? And we saw that it was this broad spectrum of times, but for almost no one was it as much as an hour. I think the median was around 34 minutes. That would be the most wonderful preferred, thing for the large segment of the people that we studied. So I think that there's a lot of room here for us to examine our practices. What do we want warnings to mean? I think, to me, this is still a really interesting social science question. I think, and this is where it'd be nice to hear from David and Patrick in any of their user engagements, but I think there's a lot of reason to believe we should make it something where you're reasonably confident, like so reasonably high probability, but also it should be timely. It should be sort of a last resort messaging, not something that we're leaning on to do all the work to inform people so they can make any choice that they have to make. And this is where we're going to have to start getting creative about how we're distributing War on Forecast information so that people can get earlier stuff and not just rely on the warning system. I'll open up the door now to any of those things that I talked about, because that was a full spectrum of stuff. I saw Patrick and David nodding. Patrick, what does that inspire in you about, the whole research program you have going on in War on Forecast? So tell us a little bit about what you think about with the public side and what War on Forecast could do.
Well, I love the Hoekstra et al. Reference, right? So I recently did some work looking at vulnerability and the use of vulnerability indices on like the WAFS time scale, which we think might not be, is not ready for that probably. But I did come across that paper, and it's been in my head a lot because we're also rewriting some congressional language right now with the Weather Program Office in OAR to update on some things that have been in the works over the years, and exactly those same questions. What is a warning? What do we want to accomplish with all this research and development tools like the War on Forecast system? So I think the system itself, WAFS, is mature enough now that we kind of have a good idea of what it can do, and now we can start setting some tangible goals for how it should be applied. And that has to take into account not only what a forecaster can reasonably do with the system, but also how it affects the product and service suite, that the public then ingests or makes use of, right? So that all has to be kind of interwoven. But I think we now know more about the pieces that need to be interwoven than we did 6 or 7 years ago. And it kind of gets to, I can't remember, maybe it was Bill's question about operationalizing WAFs. We just crossed a pretty big milestone on November 22nd. We we have a transition plan that's been drafted between ourselves and the National Weather Service Office of Science and Technology Integration. And we go before kind of a review board at the Weather Service who takes a look at the transition plan document. They came back with only very minor questions. All the groups that we talked to on the Weather Service side are very excited about it. So we have a plan the next couple of years that will include the Weather Service now in the driver's seat. Whereas, when we were developing the system, we could always justify, let's spend more money this year on running it real time to get buy-in, to prove that it works, to, continue tweaking the system. Now that it's pretty well finished, Weather Service will take over running it. It'll still be experimental, but they want to run it pretty literally, get more of these regions, because it doesn't cover the whole country, right? So it's these regional domains that move around on any given day to target where the active weather is, and they want to get their forecasters as much experience as they can and as many reps in using the system in the next couple of years, really document how to apply it to these exact situations, this potential for some sort of 60 or 120 minute messaging on individual storms with tornadoes, on flash flooding, on fire weather, whatever it might be. The next 2 years are kind of an exciting period of time where there's less developing the original prototype and there's more, okay, how do we want to use it? How do we want to train forecasters to use it so that it can hopefully go into operations, say, as early as fiscal year 28. So that's, I don't know if I answered your question at all, Kim, but I said things.
I'm going to add really quickly as we're all just saying things. Welcome to just geekery here. I'm really excited to hear, by the way, that you're working on the lead time concept some in the Weather Act reauthorization. Stephanie will be so excited to hear that, because one of the things she was saying this week was that she feels like our work fell on deaf ears. It's like, and there's been a lot of political reasons that an hour lead time has been, the goal. A lot of that's been driven, it's completely exogenous from Weather Service and NOAA as a whole. It started with a representative here from central Oklahoma, but be that as it may, I'm really excited that you are driving some of that forward and thinking more about, what is a warning? What do we really mean? What are we doing here? That'll be helpful. And I also want to make another point that I think, just underscore a point that you guys collectively have made. We often think that the value of probability information will be in, tell people when it's really certain, and that'll make them so much more likely to actually take action, because we think that's what we care about. What the work that you're doing seems to suggest is it's actually cases where things are really conditional, where it has its greatest value in helping people to make a choice, because otherwise there's not much of a choice to make. If it's really, really certain, pretty much virtually everybody's like, okay, fine, like I'm taking action now. And if it's virtually certain not to occur, that's really easy too. Those are fish in a barrel decisions. Those aren't actually decisions. The whole decision comes, and the whole value of probability information comes when things are hard, when forecasters are sitting on a fence, when, that's like when we actually could add something of value to the decision making that's going to go on. So that's something I've worked in Weather Act language. The original Weather Act and now in the reauthorization is really focusing on, we have to be very clear that our behavioral objective in all of this isn't to force people to comply, with a directive of some kind. We're working to inform decisions. And this puts us in line, by the way, with other federal agencies, where there's been a lot of work in health and even in environmental protection, that the agencies aren't there to control people. This is a deep-seated value, I think, in our country too. But when it comes to risk, there are always trade-offs. And so it's not our role to be the arbiter of that. People should be able to make those choices, and we're there to inform them. It's a very, very fundamental and important thing. And so hopefully between us, working those pieces that are very complementary, I'm excited to see where all of that could go. Do you have updated sort of intel on what we can expect possibly in a couple months when we're out of lame duck times, for things to move forward on that?
I don't. And honestly, this is more about, it's not so much about the Weather Act reauthorization as it is about an update to TWEEP. So that tornado warning improvement and extension program, which came out of the Weather Act, right, had set forth these 5 and 10-year goals. And so we are providing an update as to what the research has gotten us over the past 5 years and where it's going. We are, though, one point that you made, and I know David has some things to hop in here with, but this has been a great conversation, Kim. The 60-minute warning, we're being very clear in this rewrite, this update language, that the goal is not a 60-minute warning. 60-minute prediction can mean a lot of things other than warning. And that's what WAFS is enabling. That's really what these probability fields and seeing an intense swath of rotation or of wind or whatever it might be is allowing forecasters at the Weather Service, and I'm sure broadcast meteorologists who are starting to, I know James is one of them, they're in Tulsa, to use this in real time, can then point to that and say, okay, well, I know the entirety of western and central Oklahoma are under a tornado watch, but where we really got to watch out in the next 2 hours is down here in this corridor around Ardmore, say, and that's really valuable to be able to put areas in or out of the concern for the next little while, right?
Sorry, David, I believe I preempted you. You were going to jump in a little bit and talk about lightning.
Yeah, no. You're good. One of the things that you were talking about made me think, when you're talking about warnings, and you and I have had this conversation a lot before, is, this whole idea that obviously different users have different needs, and not everything is, not everything is a broad brush. Not everyone needs things of the same level. And, one of the clearest examples of that, I think, and Troy will be able to attest to this as well, is with lightning, right?
Yeah.
Lightning is not a severe, lightning does not create a product. And yet for an EM, and especially an EM at a, large outdoor event, lightning may be the biggest threat or the biggest risk that they have to deal with. And so to tell a really quick story, spring 2021 was actually the first time I ran across WAFs and started doing some deep dives, because I was at Kansas State at the time. We were doing outdoor graduation thanks to COVID. For the first time, K-State had never done outdoor graduation. They say, hey, we're going to do outdoor graduation in May in Kansas. We're not going to do one. We're going to do every college their own. So we did 11 graduations over the course of 3 days. Plus, we were hosting the Big 12 Track and Field Championship outdoors, same time. K-State's a very small campus, so we were all packed in there really closely. And it was
what could go wrong with that, David? What could go wrong with that?
And it was a thing where we were in a really active weather pattern, but it wasn't severe weather. We didn't have any severe weather over the course of that whole 3-4 day weekend, but we had thunderstorms on and off almost constantly. And so again, this kind of, when we talk about gaps in communication, I'm trying to communicate to my leadership at the university about lightning, and we're not in a watch, we're not in a warning, but trying to communicate that. And so this was one of the places where, again, I really fell in love with WAFs before I was ever part of this team, was finding out that, hey, there's this thing. And it was just happenstance that it happened to be running over our area for several days in a row. But me being able to pull that data and look at it and show, probability of lightning and lightning density was really helpful. Because again, the other option is, well, we just stick people in a stadium and we look at radar and our lightning detector and hope that we make a good decision, versus being able to really, really lean forward and say, let's make a good decision about this before we even start this event. And we were able to do that a couple of times to really change sort of our flow of things and get people through or delay things because of this tool. So, that was one of the times when I really fell in love with this. But back to the main point, I think when we think about users and end users, I think that's something that we're still trying to think about is, I'm a weather nerd, obviously, that I had the time to dig in and find this info and figure out how to use it. WAFs has such a huge amount of information that can be pulled, and it's such a huge source. And yet we're still trying to think about, like, what is right for an emergency manager? How much of it is we just need to let the weather service, they've got this, or broadcasters have this, and EMs need to just trust that they'll find this? Or are there ways we can make it more accessible, more usable for other end users that have other needs? Or, and again, this gets into all kinds of other social science decision-making and questions of, is that a place where NWS chat really shines, where a user can identify, I really need this information, and they don't have to seek it out themselves, but they are able to, a forecaster is able to be that interpreter for them. And so there's so much info here that can be so useful if the end users know that this is there, that this is available. So I'll stop.
No, to that point, tell us a little bit about your approach with emergency management. So some of what you've talked about is making them aware that this exists and making it approachable, but some of it too is about figuring out how to make it useful and usable. So talk about being an emergency manager coming into a research lab, and helping to make a technology something that is user-friendly. How have you approached that task, and what have you learned?
Sure. So, one thing that we've done is, obviously we have the HWT, and that's a tremendous tool that we have, but we're clearly, it's space by itself is a challenge. We can only work with so many people at a time. And so, one thing that Patrick and I have done in Oklahoma, we're hoping to expand this out to some other states in the very near future, but we've done some almost like quasi exercise activities. I hate to use the term exercise because it's not an exercise, but simulations. We've basically taken it out to the EMs. We've gone to regional meetings, we've gone to regional workshops. We've done a basic like, hey, here's what this is. Here's how it works. Here's what's going on. And when I say how it works, we're not talking about the deep physics and programming, and they don't need to know that. They don't care. They need to know what is it capable of doing. What is the kind of information that it can show them? And so we go through that, and then we sort of put them through a little bit of a scenario where we're saying, okay, look, here's a real world day. Here's a real day. Here's the real information you would have at your fingertips from the Weather Service, from the Storm Prediction Center, from, we pull all these things that are publicly available out there and say, okay, just like you would do in the real world, you're given all this information from your local forecast office, from your sources, build a briefing. Like, what would you be saying to your partners? So we do that, and then we add in some WAFS data. And we do it in a way where we're not just giving them the website and saying, here, knock yourself out. Like, we're intentionally pulling certain things and then explaining, hey, this is what this is showing you. This is showing you, potential rotation. This is showing you potential wind speed. This is showing you, lightning, those kind of things. And then seeing how they would take that additional data and kind of filter it through what they do already to then provide to their users, to their sort of downstream groups. And we do this, like I said, we've done it where we've gone out to the EMs with other EMs. EMs learn from each other. Emergency management is so much a learn by committee, by group kind of a profession. And it's very much if you've got a great idea, people absolutely want to steal it. They want to learn from you. And so, I know between Troy and James both that are enmeshed in this world, there's so much of a group of, what works? What have you found that works? How do I implement that? And so by letting them work with each other, we're also, I think, strengthening their current weather operations. We're helping them understand what each other do, what their colleagues are doing right now, but also sort of like, James mentioned, like this hide brain of, okay, now that we know this thing exists, and now that we've seen what it can maybe do, now for the next weather event that occurs, just like I said, my friends in Southwest Oklahoma that ask, hey, is WAFS running? Well, they want to know if WAFS is running because then they know they can ask questions. They can get in NWS chat. They can talk to Rick or Todd or the people at the WFO to get more detailed information than what they already have. And so I'm a big proponent of let's peel back the curtain. I'm a big proponent of I don't like treating emergency managers, and this is obviously I'm soapboxing. I don't like treating emergency managers like they're stupid or that they can't understand things or that they need to just follow along and do what we say, kind of like Kim was talking about with the public. I'm a big proponent of let's peel back the curtain a bit. Let's really try to co-develop things together with these end users. And that's going to create a better product on both ends. It's going to create a better product for the EMs and their local communities, but it's also going to help that local office know how they can really serve those end users. So like I said, we've done a few of these in Oklahoma. We did James mentioned, we did a sort of similar event at a conference recently, really focused on broadcasters. We're starting a project in 2025 with another state. We're getting out of Oklahoma to do this with some other EMs in another part of the country. But I'm really passionate about this, about trying to really experiment and really let EMs play with this and show us, here's how this would really be useful for their operations.
I'm going to turn this interview around. And David, thank you so much for all of that. Clearly, we're birds of a feather. I know our philosophies that underpin this, but it's a technology that is so freeing in so many ways, and especially can help us if we do treat people with that I honestly think dignity, that they can make those choices for themselves. And so, James, let's turn to you. I mean, an interviewer becomes interviewee. You have mentioned that you are a user of this. So talk about in the broadcast, domain. What have you done with this and how do you bring it into coverage?
And I'm going to sound like an emergency manager when my first question in chat, we've got an internal chat with meteorologists here. And of course, there's NWS chat. We got chats all over the place is, hey, check, is WAFS running today? And then it's always, oh, thank goodness. But then there's also the burden of it's more information to look at too. As just a single data point, we used it on May 6th heavily. It was running on the high risk day. And that was, if people are unfamiliar, the tornado, the EF4 tornado that struck Barnsdall, which is just northwest of downtown Tulsa. And the majority of the thunderstorms that day developed in northwestern Oklahoma. We had a couple of brief tornadoes, but they didn't really roll into the deep moisture. And so the tornado production probably underperformed what was expected based on model guidance at that point. When we kept looking, and the one really neat thing that WAFS does is it has soundings as well. And so we could look at the soundings ahead of that line of storms and know, even before WAFS plotted anything developing closer to us, is that if anything went up ahead of those storms, it is going to be ripping. So we were able to concentrate a lot more on the environment ahead of the storms, paying a close attention to radar, seeing very closely if anything would develop. And then about 2 hours ahead, we started getting the helicity tracks actually before we got reflectivity data, if I remember right. And so we could, at that point, really fine tune into, okay, let's watch just southwest of Tulsa. And indeed, that's where the convection bubbled up in this incredibly rich environment and went on to quickly produce supercells and then eventually the Barnsdall tornado. But to turn this from theoretical over to practical in the use, my question for you all is, when we're doing TV, and Troy and Alabama James know all too well, it is an information management problem for us, and it used to not be that way. How would you recommend TV people use WAFs when we have 30 seconds or a minute and a half attention breaks from doing TV to use this thing to help us out?
Don't talk at once.
I have 400 tabs open on my browser during severe weather. That's about 100 more than a normal day. So
401
people
won't
only
make a
knew. If people only knew what we see when we're on that green wall during a tornado event, their head would explode.
Yeah.
You've got here, I've got 6 Weather Service chat sessions, and you got social media, and this is critical stuff coming in here. You got people sending you images of tornadoes and damage, and you've got all these platforms, so I cannot wait to hear the answer to Oklahoma James' question.
Well, I do have some answers I can offer. So we have a product called paintballs, right? So you've probably seen them. And that takes all 18 forecast members, and it will create objects. If any of those forecast members is predicting a storm or is predicting a helicity track or a hail swath, whatever it might be, there are different paintball swaths, and you can see all 18 of them on the same plot. So if they're all right on top of each other, that equates to high confidence, right? And so if you just send that thing looping, especially with tornadoes, I found that the 0 to 2 kilometer updraft helicity paintball swaths are really useful in the 30 to 90 minutes before a significant tornado hits. You'll see a lot of those paintball swaths just right on top of each other. So those are kind of quick overview products that if I didn't have a lot of time, I could just press the play button, put it on speed 4 or 5, and let it go. And it's going to deliver a lot of information to your eyeballs really, really quickly. Right. The other thing that I'd recommend, and just thinking about other listeners out there who maybe don't have a lot of experience with WAFs, all of the cases we've run are on the web viewer day and night, 24/7. So when you're not having severe weather, when you're hanging out listening to WeatherBrains, you want to click around on the WAF's web viewer, get comfortable with the menu structure, with the products, find your favorite. Then you might have some other favorites that you'll turn to when you have those 60 seconds to duck away from your other tabs to check on what WAFs is showing you. And so that the web address is cbwafs, stands for cloud-based wafs.nestle.noaa.gov. So that's NSSL. Yeah, so I recommend that. The other thing for tornadoes, I often find that now that I've been a habitual WAFs user for more than 4 years, when we get to that point where we're past convective initiation, right? I think I kind of transition from the probability products more to the percentiles. So you think of it kind of early on, there's more uncertainty. And so you're looking at probabilities of, is this going to happen here or there? But then once enough storms have developed, you kind of have the layout of how the event's going to go for your area to some extent, right? And you might know certain storms that you're concerned about. And so then I turn more to the intensity information in that 90th percentile. And that 90th percentile vertical vorticity in the low levels for tornadoes, I think it's an amazing product. I'd love to get some publications out there that show why, but kind of still need to do some of that research. But it's often showing me where and when a given mesocyclone is going to cycle up. In other words, to see this ramp up over about a 20-minute period that often corresponds to reality for some of the more intense storms, the ones that we really care about. So paintballs and 90th percentile vertical vorticity, if I had to name a few.
It's funny the way that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I have to ask, who makes the decision to run WAFs on what days? Who's the Pope here? Which one of you guys?
That's me.
What goes into that decision? And again, we've stopped having tornadoes down here where I am. I mean, we've had nothing for the last year and a half. But at some point, it will come back around. So that's my next question. And again, you're right. I think the greatest thing you've given advice was to go in here and play with this thing now. When it's clear, when you don't have any pressure, you got all these cases on here. But when do you make that decision to run WAFs?
Great question. That's one of the two most common questions that I get. And it's a two-part answer because it's about to change. I won't be the person in charge of that. And I'm very happy about that. But for many years, it's been motivated by what are the research questions we're trying to address and what are our resources, right? So, I mean, we're not on the OAR side and at the laboratory. We're not an operational unit, so we don't have people here overnight or on weekends. So, we have a lot of dedicated folks who are willing to do some work on the nights and weekends if we've got a big event. And so that's wonderful. But for the most part, we tend to run WAFs a lot during the spring to coincide with testbed experiments so that we can actually gather some data from folks here visiting the test bed, just like Troy did. We need to have you back, apparently.
Yep.
Yeah, but and then in more recent years, as the Weather Service has more and more bought into that, hey, different groups are discovering that, hey, this thing is really making waves, and we got to check this out. They have started to give us funding to perform certain experiments. Like, for instance, this year over the summer, we ran 38 different WAFs domains on 19 different days just for aviation. where there was
Oh, wow.
a experiment funded by the Aviation Weather Center in part of INSEP. And we studied the heck out of, can you use this to help in air traffic management, in route planning? So we ran a lot of domains over the eastern US for that. The Storm Prediction Center funded some runs so that we could finally study winter severe weather outbreaks last year. And back in about 2022, I was adamant that this always running in May and June, we're missing a lot of stuff in the Southeast. So by 2022, we had that capability with our new cloud-based system. It was more stable, had better data connections to it. So we didn't have to sort of, build things back up every spring to get it running for the experiment period. We were able to do some of the in support of the field campaigns that NSSL had going on in the Southeast, like the Perils campaign. We had WAFT runs to cover those cases. And we started discovering that, for sort of messier storm modes, for fast moving storms in the Southeast, storms where maybe the convection is moving into the domain rather than forming in the domain. There's some problems there from a modeling standpoint. We don't perform quite as well in aggregate, and so we're still discovering every time we run WAFs for a different reason. We're still discovering things. It's such a game changer. I like to say it's not just a new model or the next evolution of a storm scale model. It's really a unique tool that's never been built or played with before. So there's still a ton to discover every time we run it. But to get back to James' question about who chooses the domains, the Weather Service is now setting up a protocol. It will likely involve the national centers leading that process based on the experience we've had with some of those experiment periods that I mentioned with the SPC and especially with the Weather Prediction Center as well for flash flood cases. So they'll have to work out for themselves on the NWS side, how frequently they're going to run it, what their criteria is. And we're doing more again for fire weather, like the run we're going to do tomorrow for the Santa Ana event. So I think as we as a community discover more and more uses for it, we're going to have to grapple with that. How can we boost the resources, in our so that we can run more domains more of the time, that kind of thing. But for now, 2 domains per day when it's running to cover that does cover a lot of the highest impact severe and flash flood threats.
Patrick, I've got a question that I think is probably stupid, but just forgive me right off the bat. But I was going to ask you about those storms over the Southeast and what I'm going to call the Dixie Alley storms. That is one of our major issues, and especially messaging, Kim, that we get that message out and people can't see these tornadoes. They're rain wrap, heavy, high precipitation supercells, and that sort of thing. Is it a stupid question to ask if this behaves as well in that type of environment compared rather to the plain states type tornadoes? Is that a legitimate question?
I think it's a legitimate question. I think that those different storm modes that you have in the Southeast, they do occur other places. So it's a relevant question. It's a relevant question, not just for the Southeast.
Yeah.
Maybe it's relevant for you all more frequently.
Right.
But it's just a relevant question in general. And I know that some of our researchers, like Dr. Patrick Skinner and some of his students, have studied a lot on how does WAFs perform for linear events or for MCSs.
Right.
And they're digging deeper into the questions of, well, then if it's predicting the MCS or the line pretty well, does it do well at predicting where in that line the embedded mesovortex circulations are going to be? So I don't have a good command of sort of the results of those studies yet. I think they're pretty recent and we don't have a lot of them. But I think in this 2-year period that we're going into right now, where that'll be kind of defined as a Weather Service demonstration period. Those are the types of questions that we can dig into a little further, because it's really going to be all about the real world application of this, and what do we recommend that we're seeing folks could be able to do with WAFs. Yeah.
And it for me, I mean, the Weather Service offices, and for what James does in Birmingham, and for the weather offices in Memphis and Jackson and Birmingham and places like this, where it is so frustrating sometimes when we have these events and we end up having injuries and deaths in those areas, and the messaging. It seems like it's a different creature sometimes, and I'm really interested in hear that. So thanks for making me feel like it wasn't necessarily a stupid question. So
no, it's a great question, because I would ask the same thing. And what's my biggest problem? What is my number one problem when it comes to mitigating loss of life where I work? Number one problem: manufactured housing, mobile homes.
Yep.
And I am hoping, fellas, that this will help us unlock a mystery here, because our average lead time here is about 12, 15 minutes for a tornado, which is good. But when you live in a trailer and the nearest shelter is 30 minutes away, or a gas station that happens to be open that can serve as a shelter, it's 30 minutes away, or they have to arrange transportation, there's got to be something beyond the typical warning that we have. And I'm hoping that this will provide a solution. Fellas, don't you think this will help at some point?
I do think so. I mean, I know the potential is there, and it's already there in the system. It's more, I think, a matter of rethinking how we communicate at that time. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
And I know that there's interest in the Weather Service right now. There are different groups examining that period of time, kind of beyond 30 minutes, of how do we communicate in that watch to warning zone or time period. So there's a lot of intentional research being done in that area right now.
Patrick, anecdotal evidence. You talked a little bit with your answer to Troy about other convective modes or tornado modes. Anecdotal evidence about QLCS performance.
I don't know that I personally have all that good a feel for that. Just because maybe I've focused more on the supercell cases thus far, because I think that's the low-hanging fruit. I think that's where I can definitely say that I see groundbreaking potential in the signals I'm getting out of WAFs for supercell cases, especially the long track ones. So I want to make sure we at least get that transition to operations. But for QLCS, anecdotally, I know there have been some cases where, like from the Midwest, I hear from forecasters that afterwards that, hey, it seems like the rotation tracks matched up pretty well to where our tornadoes occurred. But then I've also seen cases in the Southeast where WAFs was way behind, like the all that rapid data assimilation didn't allow it to catch up to where storms were, and maybe off by a county or two to the north. So we have some challenges still in wrapping our heads around that, and there might be other folks in our group that would have a better answer. But that's kind of my impression.
Do you have a quick, off the top of your head, what is WAFs bad at? What are the weaknesses here? When do we not want to rely on this?
Yeah, pre-convective initiation. Yeah, there's
darn.
Yeah, I know.
I was hoping deep in my heart, I was hoping that this would help with air mass thunderstorms on a hot summer day. Because convection initiation on a hot summer day. I can't tell somebody at 7 o'clock in the morning when and where it's going to rain at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Frustrates the snot out of me. So every forecast, hot and humid with scattered afternoon and evening thunderstorms. What does that mean? Nothing to the end user. And we've got to be better at this. So I was hoping James A., that this would help, but maybe not.
Hey,
Well,
you know, I think you're wrong. You can tell people at 7 a.m. where it's going to storm. You just might not be correct.
Oh, wow.
I don't expect you to be
Wow.
correct anyway, right?
Yeah.
That would be a great show title.
Yeah.
But there is hope, James. I think there's some variation in that answer depending on the environment. I'm thinking of Great Plains type environments where there's a ton of instability and it's capped. WAFs will sometimes jump the gun and it'll go into derecho mode too early, or it's just a bit too aggressive. We've done some development this year that I think is curbing that a little bit and getting better. But when I think about the few cases that we have run on summer afternoons in the Atlanta area and the Miami area, I think in those very humid boundary layers, WAFs does pretty well. I mean, even on a small scale, you can point to, especially once the first storms go up. I think that's where WAFs becomes very useful. It then is able to tell you, well, that cold pool is going to then push into this area and cause new storms, and then that's going to domino into this and this and that. So maybe prior to the first storm, it's less useful, but the minute things get going, there's a sharp change in the skill, and that's been documented in published research. So that's something to keep in mind.
Do we want to hit Patrick with Neil's question?
Yeah.
Okay. Here you go. Neil wants to know about the switch from FV3 to impasse and what all that involved.
Okay. Good question.
Maybe you ought to tell us what all that means.
Yeah, exactly. Could you diagram that sentence, please?
Yeah. Well, this was a very big deal, not only for Warn on Forecast, but for NOAA modeling in general. So if you're not familiar with the background on it, I think prior to 2016, the storm scale models, just models in general that came into operations, were developed individually and kind of piecewise. And so the Environmental Modeling Center at Weather Service ended up with a kind of a hodgepodge collection of models that we all came to rely on as forecasters. And they do a good job, those models, but they were a heck of a lot to handle. From an administrative standpoint, from keeping up that code, from implementing updates and so forth. So NOAA modeling decided, well, let's get organized around this topic and create a unified system with fewer modeling components, but with updated modeling components that we'll use going into the future that are simpler to manage. And one of those components that they decided upon was called the FV3, or it's the finite volume cubed dynamic model. And this is basically the core or the engine of a given model. The FV3 is running currently in the operational GFS, for example. And the hope in 2016, when NOAA went to this new framework, was that the FV3 dynamic core would be applicable across all scales and all applications, so that anything to come into operations in the future would use this FV3 core. Now we get to WAFs. WAFs is becoming mature around that time, right? And so by 2020 or so, about 2020, our group decides, well, okay, we need to switch over and use the FV3 core if we hope to be in operations, right? Well, that is a lot easier said than done, to go from any one model core to another. But at least this was one that's already kind of in some operational models, and it had a lot of support in the community. So we thought it was possible. However, 2 to 3 years of intensive study at both the National Severe Storms Laboratory, at the Global Systems Laboratory, at some other places that do modeling, showed that while the FV3 is really well suited to the global prediction like GFS, it's much less suited to the things that we're hitting it with the warm forecast system, like a regional domain, like 15-minute data assimilation. And we discovered enough fundamental problems with trying to use the FV3 at that scale that if you were to rewrite it to make it work, I feel you would end up with a brand new model system. It wouldn't be the FV3 anymore. So this was a real challenge to us and to the modeling community, to document this, to look at it really thoroughly, because to switch away from that FE3 core is it's a big deal. It's a kind of move. It forced us to change the way that we're thinking about this new unified system and unified components. But there's enough evidence now that as of about a year ago, the laboratories and the Environmental Modeling Center at Weather Service decided jointly that this won't work. The FE3 won't work for not only warm forecast, but also future applications that are going to go to finer resolution. If it's struggling this hard with 3 kilometer resolution of WAFs right now, what about our 1 kilometer prototype? Or what about fire weather modeling in the West? So an alternative to that FV3 is a model called MPAS, or the Model for Prediction Across Scales. And it, in its design, is right off the bat kind of better suited to these types of applications like WAFs. There's still a lot of setup work to do to get it fully viable, where we can switch over and have an MPAS based WAFs model. But we are all in to do that. We have resources repositioned now to get MPAS up and running. And now that the Weather Service is running our prototype of WAFs, that really helps, so that we can put our effort towards ensuring this MPAS model gets developed to support the future of kind of storm scale modeling. So that's probably way more than you.
That's really outstanding, though. I almost understood that. When that's a miracle.
Almost.
David, you got a point.
Yeah, just wanted to end with, again, as the very much non-meteorologist on the panel, for people that maybe have not looked at WAFs or are not familiar with it, or may listen to this and then go look up the website, I think it's important just for people to remember that, WAFs isn't just like, it's not like the HER and then clicking on composite radar and just trying to look at future radar. Like, that's not what WAFs is. That's not how WAFs works. And so don't approach this as just, this is going to be like a future radar and it's going to get everything exactly right. I think one of the things that I've really learned and have appreciated as a user, as a practitioner, is even on those days, like Patrick mentioned, where maybe it's not perfect or it's not initiating things at exactly right, I've always found things that are useful. I've found pieces that can be pulled out that are really useful. It may be about, in this case, timing may be great, but location may be off. Or in this case, it may be that the location is really great, but like Patrick mentioned, maybe the timing's a little bit, delayed. But it's finding those pieces of information that are really, really valuable for that user, for that decision maker. And just that, I don't want us to get into a world where we think, well, it's either exactly perfect or it's useless, but rather that this is giving us additional context, additional information to make better decisions like Kim was talking about. So just an encouragement for people that maybe haven't looked at this before or are going to go look at it for the first time. Just remember that that's giving you a lot of information. It's not just showing you, future radar.
And I have a final thought that, again, builds so nicely off of what David was saying. I think when we're thinking broadly about how this could be used to help people make informed decisions, something really important that's a piece of the decision-making framework isn't just the meteorological information. They need to have something they can do differently. And so in order to make this as successful as it could be, to give this the real potential, see it fulfilled, it is best to have it coupled with a transformation in the way that communities are able to engage with the information and to leverage resources, community resources, to help the people who most need something in order to help them to successfully make a decision. So earlier, you guys were talking about people who live in mobile manufactured housing in the Southeast. This is a problem that's gotten a lot of thought. And one of the things that's very apparent in that area is there aren't, public shelters available for a lot of people. But what we do know from the epidemiological evidence that's available is they don't have to get to a FEMA rated shelter. They just have to get to a house. They have to get to something that's site built, that's not a Walmart, that's not going to just peel apart in a tornado. And their odds of survival are almost perfect. We need to get them that useful information and create systems like what Alabama is trying to do with the Safer Places law. That's sort of a Good Samaritan law. You let people into your building. If they get injured in it, you're trying to help them, but you're not liable. Like, we need to think about that. And we also need to press in something the Weather Service is thinking about is community-centered warnings. So again, using this warnings word, what does a warning mean? But if we want, community to come together, warnings, something that in disaster sciences we often say is warnings aren't just a technology, they're a social process. We can put a bunch of stuff on a map and issue warnings and have this whole, all right, this should give people the optimal whatever. But at the end of the day, it's going to be organizations that manage resources that the vulnerable people need, whether it's homeless people and they need shelters opened, and warming centers or cooling centers, depending on the weather type, whether it is food banks that need to stock up, whatever it is. The resources are managed outside of the weather community. We are here just to tell people about stuff. We don't have the resources at our disposal to help people. And, to some degree, this is emergency management. This is something that emergency managers, you work with your communities. What I've learned from David is that's a big piece, is trying to coordinate all of this. I think we can press even further. And it's just so important. The technology can be there. We can give a perfect forecast and still not change very much unless we attend to this other piece too. And that is really, empowering people, the other half of the equation. So just wanted to leave it with that final thought. I obviously love the technology and I love all of this. And I also want our field to think about the value of partnering with community-based organizations, living, breathing decision makers. Don't just think about the technology. Don't just think about what you can put on a map. Think about partnership and what you can achieve with other people together.
Preach on.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do, James A. or James A. Are we okay to take a break here?
You bet.
Okay. So what we're going to do, fellas, take a quick break. We got to go to Tony Rice and his weekly astronomy report. Again, Jen is out this week. Jen's had the flu, so no This Week in Tornado History, but no email this week. But we're going to come back and do a quick weather roundup and then picks of the week. So, David and Patrick, this is your moment to think of something really cool in the world of weather that you can have as a pick of the week. And so let's go to Tony's report, and we will come right back as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
The Gemini meteor shower peaks Friday night into early Saturday morning. This year's not a great one for meteor watching. Actually, it doesn't get much worse than this, with the moon reaching full phase that evening, creating its own natural light pollution, which will hide many of those meteors. But that doesn't mean that all is lost. Though meteors appear to come from the constellation Gemini, thus the name Geminids, like any other meteor shower, they can be visible anywhere in the sky. So look away from the moon, even towards the west, opposite the rising moon in the east that evening, and to the south overnight as Gemini rises higher above the horizon, revealing more meteors hopefully, and that annoyingly bright moon heads towards moonset around sunrise. Other tips for seeing the most meteors include give your eyes plenty of time to adjust. You'll be surprised at just how many more stars and meteors and everything else are visible after just 10 or 15 minutes outside. Leave your phone inside too. You see, light kills night vision. Each time you glance at your phone, it resets that 15-minute clock. But the best advice is bundle up and be patient. The counts of meteors that you may have been hearing are averages, and they're averaged over the entire night. You could see a few dozen in just a few minutes, followed by an hour or two of absolutely nothing. Or they could be more evenly spaced out. We just won't know until Friday night. We're talking about tiny rocks the size of pebbles or grains of sand, burning up in the atmosphere as the Earth plows through the debris field left by, in this case, 3200 Phaethon, a dead comet that orbits the sun about every year and a half. It's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
All right, so quickly, the hurricane season is over. So next time we talk about that will be next year, and the Arctic air seems to be scoured out a little bit. Bill Murray, down here, we've had 60s today, like a tropical heat wave. Troy, how warm was it in Austin
I got
today?
to go and run late this afternoon, which, I can't run below about 67 degrees. I'm like those iguanas that we were talking about last week. But I was glad to see that. And other than one rogue shower passing over about midway through the run, I had to stop and get under something for that time period. But I was grateful to have the chance to do that. Maybe I can squeeze one more in tomorrow.
All right, Troy, what's going on down in South Texas?
Well, we were up to, I think, 84, 85 today in the Austin area, which established new record high temperatures for both the first order climate sites in Austin. But the cold front looks like it is probably coming up on Waco right now and moving to the south. So we do anticipate highs tomorrow closer to 61 or 60 degrees, so about 20 degrees cooler. And then near freezing, at least in the outlying areas, by tomorrow night and again on Wednesday night. We begin to warm up late in the week. Even with a little moisture back, we had minimal amounts of rain with this last system. We had maybe a half inch of rain Saturday to Sunday. The next 7 days look rather dry. I think there may be a slim chance for the weekend, but we just need some rain down here.
Yeah, buddy, I can understand that. We
Yep.
still about 70% of Alabama is still in drought conditions.
Yeah.
So we're kind of in the same boat here. So it's good to have the rain we have today. And of course, we'll turn colder on Wednesday. We got a marginal risk tomorrow down in South Alabama, kind of a low end threat. But these cold weather deals are sneaky. We've learned that after doing this for all these years. The great Al Mohler, he always said, when it comes to thunderstorms, expect the unexpected. So we'll have to watch carefully. But everybody else on the show, our Oklahoma correspondents here, what's happening in Kim? What's going on there in the central part of the state?
Sure, and I welcome additional comments from Patrick and David, who I see at the Weather Center, literally miles away from me. But yeah, we had kind of a cool, wet day. It was felt like I was in Seattle today. It was an unusual kind of, but very welcome day, transitioning us more toward our winter time here in central Oklahoma. I don't think we broke 50 degrees. And overnight tonight, we're going to get really close to freezing, if not meeting freezing. So, things clear out a little bit tomorrow, but we're chillier. And I honestly, myself, welcome some of that crisp, more wintry kind of air. David, Patrick, any additional observations from you on how the weather's been trending here lately?
I mean, we have transitioned to this world in Oklahoma for the last nearly a year now, at least Western Oklahoma. I don't know about James in Eastern Oklahoma, but where we go 6 or 8 months with no rain, and then we get 6 months worth of rain in about 3 weeks.
Flood, yeah.
And we're kind of back to that pattern where we had all this rain early November, and now we're 3-4 weeks straight now with not a drop. And I mean, today was nice because there was actually some moisture. But yeah, I feel like every time I'm on this show, I talk about drought, which again, being from Western Oklahoma, we're always in drought. But yeah, it's not a good pattern to be in.
James A., any thoughts from Tulsa Town?
No, we were 49 for a low and 52 for a high, and I'm not sure the visibility got above 6 miles today with drizzle and fog, or frog and dizzle, however you want to say it. And we're going to be down close to freezing tonight. And things you did not expect to hear on WeatherBrains. I have a mannequin in my front yard dressed up like Cousin Eddie, and it has a water pump that circulates brown water, like the scene where he's doing emptying
Wow.
out the RV toilet. So I have to get the water pump turned off and out of the brown water if it's going to freeze. So I'll be out there tonight.
Wow.
I hope we get some photos of that. That's all I can say. We clearly need some photographs of that.
Yeah.
We need to
your
deconstruct
television
that whole
station
scene.
cover this, James A? Do
I
they
hope
come
not.
out and film this?
Let's hope not.
Wow. All right, so let's move on to picks of the week. This is where everybody goes around the horn and shares something that is cool and weather related. And my pick, it's a piece written in a number of publications that says Google says AI weather model masters 15-day forecast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about this GenCast company. And Bill, we're trying to get them on the show, right?
Yeah, Friday morning, December 20th, if everything works out, because the researchers are in England or in Europe, of course, and so they can't do the 7 p.m. thing Central Time. So they did indicate they could do another time. So that show, is a strange one since it's pre James's vacation, maybe post school visits. And it looks like we've worked it out with the master to do it at 8:30 on that Friday. So if that works out, keep your fingers crossed. It should be a really good show.
We have to make sure Neil is on that show.
Absolutely. Whatever it is, we have to kidnap him and put him in the back of Cousin Eddie's RV and get him to wherever we have to.
Kidnapping might be what's required to pin this guy down, but we will. I asked him about the paper, and he has lots of thoughts, and I'm not going to do any of them justice. So we just absolutely have to have Neil.
So you're in charge of kidnapping and getting him there, Kim. So you're the one. Get it done.
All right, Troy Kimmel, give us a pick of the week. Go.
I don't have one. It's just been that sort of week. It's final office hours and exams and final exams this week. So I'm sorry, I don't have one. So I get the horn.
Me too, Troy.
Love the sounds of the fog.
Double foghorn.
We needed it.
All right. Let's get James Adelot before 9 o'clock news begins. We don't want to make him late.
No, certainly not. Normally I kind of try to find something a little lighthearted, but today, 2 days after the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, this gentleman has put together a post about one of the weather observers at Hickam Field that was killed during the Pearl Harbor attack. His name was Sherman Levine, and he was one of 2 observers stationed at Hickam, and he was killed trying to get back to his barracks to pick up his helmet when the raid started. And it's a great post with a lot of high school pictures. You really, reading this link, will know who this gentleman is, and you will really feel the pain that his friends and family had to endure after learning of his death days later.
Wow. And again, all these picks will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com, in the show notes. All right, Kim, what you got for us this week?
Sure. So I'm actually going to highlight a paper that David was a lead author on that recently was published in the BAMS. I knew he was unlikely to choose it for himself because this is who David is. He is humble beyond words, but it's a great article that talks a little bit about what he's been doing, leveraging some collaborative partnerships to try to bring light to emergency manager needs, sort of create quasi-exercising opportunities. And if you want to hear a little bit more about his work and all of that, you can check it out.
Excellent. All right, Bill Murray, what you got for us this week?
Yeah, James, I'll take the foghorn. We'll have a double foghorn tonight.
Woo!
Because I've had that kind of week and weekend like Troy has had, but I am excited to announce Philip Prince, geologist, and Trish Palmer from the National Weather Service in Greenville, South Carolina, will join us on Monday, January 6th, to talk about Hurricane Helene. And I think that is going to be a really hard and emotional show. One of our listeners nominated Philip, who went to Furman University, where my child goes, and he has done some amazing work on YouTube about the geologic disturbance created by this hurricane and the tremendous flooding. And of course, Tricia is a wonderful friend of the podcast, has been for a long time. And when I reached out to her, you could tell it's still a pretty emotional thing. So it'll be an interesting show, Monday evening, January 6th, James. And we're filling in all the dates around that right now. I just looked up Troy and realized we hadn't scheduled Greg Carvin for the year ender. So I hope that's still a real thing. It's always just been a given, but now that he's retired, I hope he'll still make a presentation for us. And even if he won't, maybe he'll just come and we'll talk about the year that was 2024.
And by the way, you're saying December 6th for this show. I think you mean the 16th,
I'm sorry,
right?
James. No, January 6th, James. I'm sorry.
January 6th. Okay.
Yeah,
January
I apologize.
6th. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, January the 6th.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's going to be a great show. Looking forward to that. All right, so David and Patrick, we have stalled long enough. I know you got something excited. So David, you take the floor first. Give us a pick of the week.
Sure. So I'm going to defer WAFs to Patrick. So with that in mind, though, with the wildfire threat tomorrow, overnight tonight and tomorrow for Southern California, I'm going to share a website that I was lucky enough to actually help contribute to in the past. It's called Prep4, the number 4, Ag Threats. I always talk about food and agriculture in rural America anytime I'm on here. This is a website, if you're familiar with like ready.gov or some of those sites that are very sort of suburban, big city focused. This one is really focused for people that live in the country, farms, ranches, people like that. And so there's an entire page just about wildfires, about how to get your livestock ready, how to get your horses ready, things like that. And so love this website. It's got all kinds of different hazards, but it's all written from a rural perspective.
Outstanding. And again, for all those people listening, we will have the links up on weatherbrains.com. All right, Patrick, the floor is yours, sir. Give us something good.
All right. Well, first of all, I'm take it that this was the first WAFs related episode, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe the first one that focused on it. So I just want to acknowledge that there's been a team of so many dozens of scientists over the years since 2009 that made this happen. And I have the really fun part of this job, which is to talk to people about how great it is, but it's all of those scientists that developed it, that I'm just amazed at what they continue to do. So I just want to acknowledge them. And then I don't know how this pick of the week thing works, but what's coming to my mind is one of the more unique opportunities of, I guess, being in government work. I recently got connected to the Egyptian Meteorological Agency, and they just purchased their first weather radar network. So I'm sure they have, defense radars and that kind of thing, but they are grappling with how to run a weather radar network and use it for applied forecasting. Which actually their major hazard, aside from dust storms, is flash floods, which when it does manage to rain there, they have terrain that is susceptible and a population that's susceptible. So that's been a really interesting, I guess, and rewarding interaction, to help another country kind of get on their feet with understanding what to do with radar data. And so there's nothing you could look up online for that, except to say that one of the cases that came to my mind was the Tropical Storm Daniel event in Libya last year, which, if you don't know about this, was just tremendously sad.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of different dams burst from the heavy rainfall and funneled into a town that was essentially swept out into the Mediterranean. So there are some science publications on that event, if anyone cared to read up on that.
And Patrick,
Excellent.
we'd love you to act as a deputy guest booking officer and speak with one of your friends over there. If they'd be willing to speak with us, I know they're several hours ahead too, so we might have to do it on one of James's special vacation shows. But it would be an honor to have a couple of those guys, ladies, men, whatever, come and talk to us about their weather service and the challenges that they face. That would be really cool. And, love to have you come back and talk with them too.
Yeah, I think if you're serious about that, they might take you up on it. They were very,
we're
very
very serious, so we can do it anytime they don't mind staying up in the middle of the night. But we can provide you with James's vacation schedule next June as soon as he knows it too, because that usually typically is a time we can do a morning show, which works better with the time change.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this was a great show. And again, Patrick and David, thank you both for those of us in the practitioner world for what you're doing. This is just outstanding work. And for those of you that are listening, if you're new here, WeatherBrains is typically on the air every Monday night at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. You can watch it live. Most of you listen. But if you want to get in touch with us, our email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. Please send us one. We'll have an email segment next week. On behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless.
Thank you, Patrick, David.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Great
David,
show.
for making it happen.
Patrick. Yeah.
I've been
David,
looking
I
forward to
know
it.
you get the chat, David, but you have to. Some of the faces we make are because Oklahoma James here always